for suggesting a very interesting topic. What is success in mediation? And Teresa, obviously a wonderful conversation with you in the last session. And thank you for always coming in. But now Jeannie knows, because she's already done this, she has to tell us about the conference. Teresa has such nice things to say. Now there's competition. Jeannie, let's hear some nice things. So she was really nice. I don't know whether you heard them, Jeannie, what she said.
No, I
oh,
missed
so
I missed the beginning of the session, but I did hear the rest of it. So what did you say, Teresa?
No, you have to come up with yours part.
I already did it. We both
Better.
did.
It has to become
This morning,
better.
yeah.
Yes, Jeannie, what do you have to say about the conference?
Well, the only thing I would say that this World Mediators Conference really is an opportunity for mediators across the globe to discuss unresolved issues in our field and to learn from each other. I have learned a lot listening to sessions, hearing perspectives from other parts of the world where I do not interact on a regular basis. So it's incredibly beneficial. There are sessions happening throughout the week, each week. It started on the 18th, World Mediator Day, celebrating Ken Cloke's birthday, May 18th. And it goes through the end of June, is that right?
Yeah, 30th June. You people have to keep time for the last session, which is on 30th, which is learnings and key takeaways. That's at 7 o'clock India time. I will also send you people a calendar invite. But just put it in your diary, because that's also an important, what you're saying right now. But when we all sit together, all those nice things, various people's points that you found useful, at least you can tell them. That'll be a nice thing. They should also hear from your mouth what you enjoyed. So that is what the idea behind the conference is. Of course, I have to repeat that all of them are available. Sessions are available on YouTube. Search for Mediator Vikram. You'll find the YouTube channel. You'll find everything there. So that's how it is. So, Ginny, you have to lead the conversation. What is success in mediation?
Well, I heard Teresa talk about that a little bit in the last session. Our so in the U.S. perspective, so much of mediation is focused on settlement. It's really focused on people coming to an agreement. Some people say success is a durable agreement, so it's not just what's written on the paper, but it needs to also hold up. It needs to hold up over time. It needs to be functional, it needs to be durable. I think in the community mediation field, we tend to look at a lot of other factors that we think are more important than just agreement. But before we turn to some of those other factors, maybe Teresa and Vikram, you'd like to weigh in on settlement as a measure of success. I said to Vikram at one of the other sessions, when you have a mediator who comes in and says, I got an agreement, it's like, what did the participants do? And who decides whether agreement or even things being written down is the most important measure? So I think, do we want to debunk that first before we look at other measures of success?
How did you get that settlement is also of course, that part of it needs to be discussed, because what is happening in that room, we have no idea. So I do tell people about there's a particular interview of a mediator, of course, part of the court system, who says that the mediator will decide. If he's saying it outside, and in that interview 4 times, what is he doing inside? So settlement, yes, on my terms kind of settlement. This is the way you have to settle. Have to. So that have to also comes in. So what is really happening inside, that's another aspect of it. But for a moment, let's leave that aside, or those issues. Otherwise, is settlement the criteria for the mediation? Actually, one of my that lecture series that I had, in my volume. Yes, Teresa?
Yes, it just is lower than I can hear Jeannie just fine, but you sound a little low compared to last session.
Maybe I didn't have enough to eat.
Maybe you're getting weak.
No, so I think we had one session with Tat Lim from Singapore in that lecture series where this is what he was talking about. So definitely, whether we have to see whether that's the gauge. So Teresa's going to tell us what her thoughts are. because Jeannie doesn't want, she actually was supposed to lead the conversation a little more.
Well, she just did. She said, let's start here and have a conversation about it. That's leading.
Her concept of conversation, having a conversation is, we are in a circle. Come tell me what you are thinking.
Exactly.
No, right. Jeannie, we have to hear what you have to say and we'll take it from there. That was the idea behind this. The other thing, the idea behind the conference was that people come in for discussions. What is it? It's become like the symposium that you have a session. There's a topic and that person is talking about the topic, which is what in my sheet I did not want to put names against the topics so that people don't think that these are the only people talking. But I think everyone's got used to this symposium format. I think getting that out of them is difficult. The idea was that anyone comes in, is part of the conversation,
and to invite people to put in their comments or suggestions or questions. So so in terms of leading the conversation, the first question or the first topic is really the idea of settlement or agreement being a criterion for success, and where do each of you weigh in on that? And then we'll move to some of the other possible criteria for or measures of success. But yeah, so so Teresa, where are you on that?
I have some mixed feelings about it. So some of it for me has to do with the context within which I'm working. And so, primarily, almost exclusively, but primarily I'm doing family related work. Primarily that's divorce related work. And these are folks that, again, most, but not all of them, have filed something with the court. And I say most, not all, because some come pre-filing, pre-suit. They have lawyers, they've hired lawyers, but they haven't filed anything with the court. They just know they need some input from legal advisors, and they want to go ahead and come to mediation, and they want to try and sit down and see if they can come up with an agreement. But their expectation is, I know I need, as a participant, to come up with an agreement because marriage is a legal construct, divorce is a legal construct, and I need to come up with a settlement agreement. And so that's kind of why I'm here. That's why I'm with the lawyers. That's why I'm with Teresa, because I need to come to an agreement. And some people, of course, that come, they have limited time and resources. They don't necessarily have the ability to see mediation as an opportunity for education, for personal growth, for having the time for apologies and forgiveness and these other things that we might want. They may seek that elsewhere, but they're really looking in the mediation process to find an agreement to reach settlement. And certainly if they've already filed, there's maybe even more of a push to do that. So I struggle sometimes because I feel that I want to help them achieve something that is one of their interests in being in the mediation. On the other hand, I often mediate some very difficult and very complex situations because I've been around a while. So that's the kind of work that comes to me. And so in these complex situations, a particular mediation session, whether they come back to me or not, or whether they come back to a different mediator or not, often mediation sessions are needed, and the expectation of reaching an agreement or a settlement in a particular session may not actually be in their best interest. It may be in their best interest to make movement through some mediation sessions, and then sometimes not reach their agreement in mediation at all, but reach their agreement after a mediation in a different context. So I candidly am a little bit, sort of torn. And I think the big thing is to be open, to not close. Again, I'm going to go back to my and versus or. There's lots of appropriate ways, I think, to define success. The most important one being, what do our clients, what do our participants say? Was this, they may not use the word success, but I really like when I hear at the end of a mediation, whether we got an agreement or not, when one or both participants say, this was time well spent. I learned some things today. I know some things I didn't know. I was given a lot of food for thought. And they also, I know we didn't reach an agreement, but I'm good with that. So those are my thoughts.
Yes, Jeannie, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
But I just love the yes and, the both and, that it's not always either or. But I think, yeah, so I think the bottom line there is, what do the participants want? What are they there for? What is the context? But I think there's such a presumption, particularly on the part of mediators themselves, and particularly in training, that the agreement is the end all and be all, that something needs to be in writing. And that I think, to push back on that, sometimes they just want to say their piece and move on, but again, if it's going back to the court and it needs to have, that's what people are looking for as well. So it definitely varies. I think in the community mediation world, we often use a satisfaction survey, or a survey at the end of the mediation. We send that out. I don't know that people in private practice or courts or other places actually do that. And so what questions you ask or choose to ask in terms of that satisfaction makes a big difference as well. So for example, and I wanted to just go through, because it has to do with the process and so are you getting that sort of feedback, and so it's not just how do you define success, but then how do you measure it, and are you paying attention, or is it just that warm fuzzy you get as you close the session? In one of the versions of our surveys, it had preparation questions. So prior to the session, I felt prepared for the session, and the information prior to the session was helpful. And then it's on a Likert type scale, agree, disagree, somewhat agree. So are you asking how prepared people feel walking into the room? Because that can make a huge difference. If they're walking in knowing nothing, they don't know what mediation is, they think it's arbitration, they think it's meditation, what are their expectations, and are you able to manage them then? So the idea of measuring preparation for the session, do either of you do that? Do you know mediators that do that regularly to prepare their participants and then evaluate that?
The problem right now is that I'm a little distracted because I'm actually replying to email. So, Ginny, you were taking it forward. Teresa's there. Teresa, please jump
Teresa,
in.
Jeannie, I have no problem answering. So I don't do a formal assessment related to preparation. And although most of the folks I work with, as I said, have some sort of legal case that's pending, I don't directly work in a court-connected or court-based mediation program. I know that many of those programs here in Florida do have surveys like your community mediation surveys that ask questions mostly about outcome, but I do know that there are some surveys that are asking some of those questions related to preparation. So I don't have a formal survey, but I do think it's important for me to know, as the mediator, how prepared a participant thinks that they are and feels that they are. And so I usually do ask some questions at the beginning of the mediation about that preparation piece. And I also ask the lawyers because I will often have a little meet and greet with the two lawyers. And part of what I'm asking them is, how prepared are you for the mediation? What information you exchange? What did you do with your clients to prepare them? Have they seen any documents that you all have been working on? And so I'm on the fly getting a sense of how prepared people are. So I can't give a scientific, you probably can from your data, but generally, I think when folks come in believing they're prepared, feeling prepared, they have a better mediation experience. Whether that always leads to some definition of success, I'm not sure. Be curious to hear more about the community mediation data. But I certainly do gather that information. I think it's important to understand that at the beginning of the mediation.
Well, and it's helpful, and I so appreciate what you're saying, and particularly with the attorneys, when you have representation in mediation, that you think you may have prepared people I remember one case in particular where I think somewhere in the process we didn't describe, I think we assumed that everyone shared the same definition of mediation, particularly the council did. And then when everything started in face-to-face and continued face-to-face, and their construct was separate, and caucus, shuttle mediation, one of the attorneys was absolutely not prepared for that. And so we realized, in the moment that the preparation hadn't included, here's how we define the process, what it will look like. And so, and even though you might have a sheet saying, here's what it looks like, or here's what mediation means, here's how it's going to go, not everybody's going to even read that. So it really took them aback that we weren't going to do the traditional shuttle, what they had come to expect.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I do send out some information in advance. I do ask for a signature on that information. And I don't have a number on it again, but a certain subset of people, because I always ask them, and talk about some of the basic sort of structure of the mediation at the beginning, of course. And I ask them, and people sometimes are frank. I signed it, but I didn't read it. So it's accurate that lawyers that I work with that maybe haven't worked with me before are maybe surprised at some of the ways that I approach things, and they haven't paid attention to the leading up to the mediation. And so then their clients are less prepared, and often the clients haven't read what I sent out. I don't know what to do about that. But
well, and that's why, I don't know if you heard, but in circles to repair harm, you're going to meet with everyone ahead of time. You're not going to rely on, somebody else conveying the information. You're not going to put it in writing and send it off because you're assuming literacy, you're assuming other factors, but to really sit with people and have that, and it might even just be 15 minutes sometimes. Oh yeah, I've done circles before. I know it. I've read the stuff. I'm good to go. But you might probe on some questions. So what do you really think is going to happen? Or what are you most concerned about? So that you can pull out to really see if they're understanding what this is going to be like, particularly if it's going to be a difficult conversation. So the care in preparation and restorative practices can be very different than the care, the prep for even family cases, which can be super difficult, as you know.
But what you can say is, we have someone saying hello to you, to all of you, both of you. God Slow. Her name is God Slow. Now, am I pronouncing it correctly or not? I don't know. But that's one hello for you.
Wonderful. Yay.
She's based in Nigeria. Yeah.
Oh, terrific. Yay, Nigeria. That's great. So the next sort of sets of measures have more to do with the sessions themselves. And again, it's what are your criteria? I remember at one time we had a question like I learned something new, even just I did people come away with that new thing. But I think our most important measure was I had the opportunity to say what I wanted to say. And that question is really carefully crafted because it's about the opportunity to speak, even if you chose not to. So do you feel that you were invited, that you had the opportunity, that the space was created to talk about what's bringing you there? So, and that's again on a Likert type, satisfaction scale, but that idea that you really had that opportunity. And so that's sort of our first measure. And I'm not sure that everyone would agree that that's sort of the most important thing, but in the community mediation world or the program with which I work, that was really what came out as the most important measure.
Well, I think what we also, I think, Jeannie, what we were talking about in that earlier session about the way the whole concept of restorative, practice or justice and all, and the move away from certain practices and what we call mediation has got into some technical formal box. So let's take from the aspect of those circles, what is the expectation there? What is success in that? And maybe that is what we're looking for. So what is success there?
Well, and it might be this, I think the same thing, that the opportunity to say what I wanted to say. So even if you passed the talking object every single time it came to you, you still had that opportunity. You had the object in your hand, and you may have chosen to just listen, to not participate, but you hung in there. Because sometimes teachers might say, well, the kids never said anything. It's like, but they hung in there. They had that opportunity. They listened, they stayed part of the process. They were physically present. And even if the kid's up walking around the room, they're still there having that opportunity, should they choose to speak or not. And sometimes it might take all semester for someone to feel comfortable enough to speak or feel that they have something that they want to say. But it's the opportunity to speak that's, at least from my perspective, one of the most important things.
So basically what you're saying is that one thing is staying in the process. So maybe also comes from what Teresa and I were discussing, that if you have the right people there and the parties trust the person and the person connects in a certain way, the people will stay in the process. That by itself, first of all, is success to start with. Teresa, what do you think?
I like that, Vikram. I agree with that, because one of the challenges in the work that I do, when people don't understand the opportunity maybe that mediation provides, there is this idea that it's a sort of a punch your mediation ticket thing. And so sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their head around, this really is a place I can go and be heard and have an opportunity to talk about what's important to me, and find some, learn some things and explore some ideas and options that hadn't occurred to me before. And maybe I can come away with agreement on some things, and if not everything, narrow the scope of what we don't agree upon. And so they sort of approach it of, let me get in and out as quick as I possibly can, because I just want to punch my ticket and get on back to litigation, right? And so just sometimes keeping them in the mediation space in a way that feels productive, not in a way that they look back and say, boy, I wasted my whole day, right? That keeping them in the space is the first sign maybe of success, that they stay in, and they stay in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think from the mediator's perspective, I think that is the first point, that you are tested as someone the parties are connected to, for them to want to stay in the process. Then the next stage, whether the parties between themselves are able to connect. So that by itself is maybe the next stage which will happen. So maybe
and let's peel this a little bit more, because then the next one is, first one was I had the opportunity to say what I wanted to say, but then the next statement is everyone's comments were given attention during the session. So from that participant's perspective, was everyone treated equally in the process or given attention? So imagine if somebody said no to either of those statements, as the mediator, how would you feel coming out of that? Or somebody didn't feel that they had the opportunity, or they didn't feel that everyone's comments were given attention. So, so we're trying to get it from both perspectives. And then two more questions. One is, the session helped me better understand the situation. So, that gets into I had new information, I saw things from a different perspective. And then another one is, the session improved my communication with the other participant or participants. So, and that gets into the dialogue, the exchange, how things happened. So think about, so just interested in your thoughts on those other measures. And then I have a few more I want to go through as well to get your perspectives on those.
That's surprising. Jenny, we don't have structured approach to our discussion. Now you got a structured approach coming through. You have an agenda. We don't have an agenda when we have discussions. Okay.
Well,
so
but I like it.
I like it.
I know it's different. It's different. That's all I can say.
You've had people with PowerPoints. You've had some very
I had 2
structured.
PowerPoint slides. The first one I did. So I just to give a framework. But I think I don't. And part of the reason I'm doing this, Vikram, is that I'm not sure that people think about these things, particularly if all you're really focused on is settlement. then are you thinking about, and are these the right measures? Because, these are what one center, in Minnesota said was most important. Now, NAFCM, we can share evaluation or client survey forms. This is the sort of thing we talk about. What do we measure and why? But this idea that, did you understand the session better, the situation better as a result? So even if you did an agreement, did you have a better understanding?
I was trying to put it into stages in the sense that one, of course, I said they connected to the mediator so that they stuck in the process. The other is whether they found that space to be a space they wanted to be in. So, of course, the mediator is just one part of it. The whole, whatever I'm saying, look, I would use words like energy, which of course will not have no specific definition that I can tell you. It's an experience. But is that something that also is successful from the mediator's perspective or the parties, whatever? I'm not saying whose perspective you're looking at, but that aspect is also something which I feel. I'm going stepwise. We'll get to each of those points that you said. We'll put it up on the screen if you have to. We'll go through. We'll check all of them. We won't stop the session up till we don't do that. So,
but like we had, so a question that could be, I felt safe during the session, so that gets into safety, or you could have it be around energy or but you also to have some open-ended space for people to have comments around that. So if they say, no, I didn't feel this, and if they can speak to more, or then just a really basic, the session was beneficial by however they want to measure that themselves. So.
Teresa wants to come in.
You can have an energy question if you wanted. Yeah, Teresa.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So basically, the question being, did you like the energy in the room? Is that the question we're putting out there, Jeannie?
Well, that could be a question if that's what's important to you or the program you work with. How was the energy, or what was the mediator's energy, or what was the dynamic in the room? I mean, you can, try to, measure that in a way that people can answer that question, but then to also set it up at the beginning so that they understand that's going to be one of the things that's important in this process that we want. So we will say that, we want this to be a safe and respectful experience for you. And so what does that look like? So we know that we can, and if something isn't working for you, let us know.
Yep. Yes.
And then you can we move on this form to the agreements, if you reached one or not. In my opinion, the agreement was fair. I'm satisfied with the agreement we developed, which are two different, it may not be fair, but I'm satisfied, or it's fair, but I'm not 100% happy, right? So you're really trying to then get a sense of how did they feel about if they reached an agreement or not. So those may be a little different.
Yeah, and you referred earlier, Jeannie, to this concept of durable agreements, and certainly it's great when folks reach the end of a mediation process, whether it's multiple sessions or one, and they understand the agreement, they understand for themselves why they agreed to the agreement. Fair is always an interesting word, right? That's a whole nother topic, this concept of fairness. But they're generally satisfied. They understand and they're satisfied with the outcome. And, that seems to the sense of, was this mediation successful? I'd be curious when you look at your data, if you tied in, that latter part, and how much of a variable that is in some sort of overall measure of their satisfaction. If they're given a yes and no, satisfied or not satisfied, how much that settlement variable would be in the mix. So we might say that the settlement, the agreement, is it as important maybe as other things? But I'd be curious what the relationship is in participants' minds, no matter how much they might value some of the other items, does it come down for them that it's really about, did I reach agreement or not? And that's the biggest variable related to
Yeah, and there
definition of success.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think we don't weight, these are not weighted in any sort of a way. So I'm not sure that, that's a great, to sort of do that, of everything that happened, what was most important to you, that might be a really good question, or something. Because you can still have people who feel satisfied with the process, because then we have 3 more questions, even if they didn't reach an agreement. So that there's satisfaction with the agreement, there's satisfaction with the process, with the mediator, so what are you looking for? And you can't have too many questions, right? Because people aren't going to spend, an hour doing their satisfaction survey.
Correct.
So it's culling what you're looking for. And from a community mediation perspective, we, as you were talking about on the professionalization side, it's not just the training, it's the apprenticeship, and then it's the ongoing supervision of the panel of mediators. So these are the documents that we're looking at to see how our mediators are doing, and do we have any problems, and what is, what's actually going on in that room, Vikram, because this is one way to find out what's actually happening. And the co-mediation model is another way, because you have 2 people who then are preparing together and debriefing together, so they can say, yeah, she did not think this was fair at all, but she really wanted to get out of there, and she knew she wasn't going to win in court, right?
But what
so
are we doing?
They know.
But Ginny, are we putting down questions? That what are the questions that you want to ask people in relation to how they found it successful, the mediation? That's what we're doing. Is that the idea?
We're looking at possible measures of success, and to show the range of possible questions and things that people might be looking at, because it's not just I got an agreement.
Okay, so maybe one question can be that, did you understand yourself better? The other will be, did you understand the other person better? Something like that. Do you think? What do you think, Teresa?
Did you have any new insights? But I think the question about I understand the situation better, improved communication are the questions that are trying to get at that. This communication improved around the issue, and that I understood the situation differently because of the process. And then the 3 sort of closing questions, and again, these change, and I'm not sure, but one is, the facilitator or mediators remained neutral during the session.
Is that a gauge of being successful? That are you looking from that perspective, or is it something which is a general feedback on the mediation? That's a feedback on the mediation. But the fact is, but I'm saying that in relation to the fact that you found it to be a space which was, whatever you want to call it, safe space or whatever word you want to use, that by itself, I think, isn't it linked to this? That because you found that the mediator, whatever way the process went through, you found it to be something which helped in you maybe understanding yourself, understanding the other side. You found that you were not being judged and all those things. I don't know how many. There's going to be a long questionnaire.
Well, it could. Well, and some people that are really studying it will actually see if they can do interviews or tape the sessions, with people's permission. So with all the studies that go on, those are the types of things, understanding that can change the dynamics. But taping or doing interviews when people are willing. So this is more just for the day-to-day mediations. But the remaining neutral is I think one of those measures that we're looking at, because if the mediator told me what to do is not what we're going for here, right? So we want to know what's happening, how people are feeling.
No, Teresa,
sorry.
Do you define neutral at that point, so that we are, so they may not define neutral as telling me what to do. They may define neutral as the things that you've already asked about, in terms of, like, I had an opportunity to speak, both of our input was valued, those sorts of things. I just wonder if
no, because I think we're actually going into a very complex area there, because even like the fact that you said that we were told whatever, we were told what to do, supposing, I don't know, however they would word it. What we're really going towards is that, look, was the process purely facilitative? And you trying to make you're trying to put words in their mouth. Look, it's a process. They don't understand these technical differences. At the end of the day, was it your process? If you came into a settlement, was it your settlement terms? As long as you were not forced to do something. So then to be
Well,
able to,
or the other part of that question is that person was really on so-and-so's side. She was really on my ex-wife's side, right? So that's the other thing. Was there a partiality that was playing out that the participants felt that? So so you're right, we left that open.
Well, that also, no, finally you might think that the mediator was partial, but at the end of the day, did it affect the process? Did you feel that I mean, look, you walk out with a settlement, and then you say that mediator wasn't impartial, but it did not affect the way you went through the process. Then how does it matter? I mean, if you felt that, I mean, okay, but at the end of the day, you got over it. Maybe we don't know what happened, but you came out. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, these are very. I mean, we're getting into such finer points for them. We are actually getting words out of them, which are not things that they from their end are even looking at. It's not something, because I'm telling you the theoretical, technical part of it. When you bring it in, and you start dissecting it on those terms, people don't really know what to really talk about, and then it goes into a direction where this is what we expect you to say. I don't know whether that's the correct way of going about gauging success and getting into so many detailed aspects of the process and the technical aspects which come in. But Teresa will definitely throw some light on that. Yes, Teresa.
Obviously I'm not the one taking the survey, but just generally, I liked the questions up to this one about neutral, because I think of it in this more technical way. And I just wonder, if as Vikram's saying, it might be in a plainer, here's my experience language might be more helpful. I think you said there were final three though. So there's one about neutrality. What are the other two? I'm just curious.
Okay, well, and they get to kind of where I think you were talking about this, Teresa. I would encourage others to use mediation to resolve their disputes. So that sense of, I'm satisfied, and I would encourage others. And then I felt that this was worth my time. So that this was a good use, I think you said good use of my time, that this was worth my time. So, big picture, yes, I would do this again, basically, that I would encourage others, and that's a little, these are both, that middle one is a little bit leading in that I would encourage others, because that's what we're trying to get at here. Would you encourage someone else with a similar conflict to do this? Or would you say, oh, go to court? Would you do this again? Right? Because people, even though somebody might have a successful mediation experience, that doesn't mean that the next time that they are experiencing conflict, they're going to call up and let's use mediation. Or they may think it's only for their divorce, it's not for their neighbor's garage.
Because actually, what I'm also looking at is that from what you understood or knew about mediation and certain apprehensions that you had or whatever, then after the process, what were your thoughts on those aspects? All the negatives that you might have been told or whatever, did that change for the better? That would be maybe also what I would call success.
Yeah. What were your expectations, or what did you know, and what insights did you gain? Is that kind of where you were thinking?
Basically more about the apprehensions that you had on the process because you heard something or whatever, and then when you went through it, certain things, maybe that thought process changed, certain things got clarified, and you looked at the process differently. Then this aspect of whether you will tell someone else maybe flows from there. Because you are going to because we look, finally it's about educating people, the user educating users. That's finally what the end thing is. If they are going to go back with an impression of mediation which is different from what we would want them to talk about, I think maybe it's better that we understand what their thought process on it was. Because I do hear a lot of cases of people, of course, coming out of the court system, what they have to say about mediation is not very nice. So I really feel that yes, it's a good thing to be discussing with them so that we understand how because for me, well, it's that blind man in the elephant situation is mediation. So we might say that you've experienced mediation, but what they've experienced, is it really mediation in the whole sense or whatever sense? So those are things which come up. And whenever Teresa nods, I feel so happy. So nice.
Yeah,
Teresa.
because, I am listening to you talk about what the important piece to me, actually, when folks go in and they experience something that's called mediation, and it's not anything like how I see it or Jeannie sees it or Vikram sees it, and the potential damage that's done then to the general concept of what mediation is, and the word of mouth around, how many people get told my mediation experience was horrible. And that mediation word, what does that really mean? And, that definitely does happen here as well, in the area that I work sometimes, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Fortunately, it's not the only thing that happens. There's lots of good news that's spread about mediation
absolutely.
where I am. So it's not one situation. And then, sort of back to the whole purpose, Jeannie, I think your community center, doing the survey is to say, what can we do to increase the the aspects of a positive experience for mediation participants or restorative processes participants? How do we make it a more positive experience for a greater number of people? And how well that, I don't know, you tell us, how well do the results of the survey filter back into changes that are made within the community center? Does that actually happen?
Yeah, and the idea is, so if you have a program committee, say of your board, or a board and staff and volunteer, or it could be under your volunteer area, but you're looking at those stats maybe quarterly and sort of saying, how are they going? And then the idea of looking at your, from the co-mediators, if you get something that's really an outlier, who the mediators are, you might call them and talk to them, say what happened and want to talk about this particular session that happened and how did you feel things went. And see if there was something that was an anomaly, if there's something we need to do differently, if we get a lot of people that's saying they're not feeling prepared. So it's that, and it's really thinking critically around the services you're delivering, and what could you be doing differently to enhance how participants feel about that experience.
But you have to tell us,
and making sure it matches your values. Go ahead.
You have to tell us what came out of those surveys. What did you get to know?
Exactly that things, also that maybe some questions don't work as well as others, so you're constantly tweaking. But if our core value, which it was at the time, was really, I had the opportunity to say what I wanted to say, we really want to make sure that that's, we're getting the highest marks on that. So, our mediators really creating that space for people to understand how they focus. And then if we're suddenly seeing that agreements aren't feeling fair, well, in housing court, maybe they're not going to feel as fair because of the power differential between landlords and tenants, for example. So context may also be something where we'll talk about that. How can we make an agreement feel more balanced, so that it's not just the tenant will, the tenant will, but there's also, what is the landlord going to do so the agreement feels more balanced, may feel more fair. But if it's a agreement for overdue rent, you may not get high marks on perception of fairness from both people in the room.
But then because the mediator was not able to handle the power imbalances? Was that the issue?
If it's basically I'm the tenant and I didn't pay rent and I owe you rent, I'm going to have to work out a payment plan potentially. Now, there may be something that the landlord has, like you're going to make sure my record is expunged if I pay. So then it feels more fair to me. But I may not feel, having a payment plan that goes on for 6 months may be better than what I get in court, but it may not feel 100% fair, even though I had a voice in negotiating what that looks like.
Well, I'm just thinking from the result of all this that these questionnaires that you sent out, are we being able to bring out from that whatever at the end of the day you said satisfied or not satisfied, I don't know, whatever the final thing is going to be, what did you find in that, what actually
Oh,
went
in different,
into
yeah, 95% satisfaction. It obviously varies beyond, context dependent, but people are, yes, I had the opportunity to say what I wanted to say. I felt prepared. The agreement was, I was satisfied with the agreement. The mediators were neutral. So you get these very positive outcomes. If a mediation falls apart in the middle, you may not get those same levels. Things didn't go maybe as they thought, but to be able to talk about that and say, what can we learn from these? Not to use them punitively at all, but to say, what do we need to do differently? Let's say we have a lot of people that don't feel prepared. Well, what do we need to do differently about that? What's the context? What can we do differently?
Well, the way I'm looking at it is that one, the settlement, they didn't reach a settlement, and then we should look at that question and say, look, we were satisfied with the process for these reasons, although we did not get into settlement. Because you get into a settlement, you're so happy about it, or so whatever whatever, maybe you're happy or not happy, I can't say, depending on the situation. But you walked out of it, whatever questions you give them, they say everything good, 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 good. That one might not be the right gauge of what their satisfaction or their success they're looking at it. But from a person who's gone through the process, hasn't walked out with a settlement, and then says, these are the things that I found, which was, like you said, I got to speak, or I got this, whatever their reasons are, that would be interesting.
Well, because some people truly don't come in looking for an agreement. They're looking to be heard. They're looking to be understood. And that's okay, and maybe agreement will never happen. Maybe it'll happen, down the road at some point in time. But, that push for settlement may not be where people are.
So from whatever you said, now Teresa is going to tell us from her end, what is it that she feels is success in a mediation, in whatever out of whatever Ginny's discussed, otherwise also these things. What do you think, Teresa? You want to put them down?
I actually kind of said it in the beginning, I guess, for me, what I most want is for the participants, this is very subjective, but for the participants to believe that the time was well spent and that they made movement forward.
So basically, okay, you're saying something.
And sometimes that means they have reached an agreement, but it doesn't always mean that. And it's sort of go back to a customer satisfaction sort of thing from the profession of mediation, right? Or the business of mediation. They're a satisfied customer in the service that was provided, in the sense that they made some movement forward. And that usually is the type of satisfaction sort of component that's being shared with me, whether they reached agreement or not. I would say this sort of tracking actually some of Jeannie's questions there is that sometimes when we didn't reach an agreement, someone doesn't, sort of globally see it as time well spent, money well spent, we made movement forward. Then sort of the next category that I hear is I got to say some things that I needed to say today. And so for me, all of those things work for me in my feeling of this is work that was worthwhile today. Just in all candor, it doesn't feel good to me when there's no agreement. There's no sense that the time was well spent. And we don't even have I learned something or I felt heard today. That doesn't feel good for me as a mediator. Part of my job satisfaction is feeling like there was some value to the work, some difference that was made.
So I'm just thinking that in terms of the topic also, so the topic was, what is success in mediation? That was the topic, Ginny?
Yeah. success.
And
So that's my,
what is
that's how I see success. It's from the participant perspective.
No, I was just saying something else. I was saying not what you said. I was saying
Okay.
the topic is what is success in mediation. Are we going to differentiate it from what is a successful mediation? Are we doing that, or is there something different that will come out if that was the topic?
So what is?
Not for me. I don't know that I would differentiate those two questions of what is success in mediation from what is a successful mediation. I suppose we could spend an hour picking apart those sentences and come up with some differences. But for me, from a meaningful perspective, from a practical perspective, they're one and the same. I guess I could stretch and say, what is success in mediation? Meaning there could be small successes along the way, but they're going to sound very similar to what I just said. For me, is that sort of overall, notion of success.
What do you think? What do you think, Jeannie? Would there be?
Well, and I agree. I totally agree with Teresa. And I think part of the reason I just posed the question, because I think it's also who decides and who defines. So, I shared the perspective from a community mediation, which may not work in other contexts. And this is really, we also have, for the mediators. So what do the mediators decide? What does the program decide? What does the funder or the context decide? Because they may have their own. What do the participants think? So, but we're really grounded in the participants having that opportunity, and creating that space. But each of us may might have really different ways of measuring that in different, just as, I don't think we ever discussed what's the energy in the room. I mean, that would be a really different measure. But if that's what's most important to you, how are you going to prepare people for that? And then how are you going to assess whether that happened?
Yeah, because if you look, the thing is that these are the questions where actually you're pushing them into an answer. What was the energy in the room? If you just ask that question, that by itself, they'll give you an answer, definitely. But will they be able to understand what was happening for anyone to understand that? So I think sometimes maybe some things are best left not even answered. I think it's just the experience. So finally, I think it's all about whether you've had a good experience or not, is what you're saying. Something like that. Is that how it is? So do you think at this point of time, Teresa can give her little closing remarks, and then of course Jeannie will close and I will get the final word?
Well, I think what I just said a moment ago was probably the biggest part of my closing. The only thing I might add, following up on something Jeannie said, is we do really have to think about kind of who's being asked and who gets to define success. Because if you're looking at, for instance, a funding source, if you're looking at something that is court-based, their definition of success might be completely and only aligned with settlement, right? And so it then becomes a different sort of question. But I definitely fall along the lines of participant satisfaction, define success first. My satisfaction comes in there again because I want to feel like I've job well done, right? I've contributed something, and then depending on the context you're in, next would be, did they solve the problem that they've brought to the table? And depending on who we're asking, their focus may be in a different area than where my focus would be.
Perfect. Yes, Jeannie, or
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you, Vikram, for this opportunity, because even building upon that sort of thing, we may say for the mediators, how did they, for co-mediators, how did they feel working with each other, and what were their perspectives? Because they may come away really different. And the idea of what is the funder's source, yes, it may just be settlement, but we can provide them with other information that may help them understand the ancillary benefits of mediation for the participants. And so being able to at least ask these questions, other people may have some mediators, like we had a mediator who volunteered in housing court, partly because he wanted to keep people housed. This was a social justice thing for him. If I can help them work this out, somebody's not going to be evicted particularly, or at least in this particular situation. So, what is the mediator walking in there with? what are other measures that we're not even talking about right now? So I appreciate this conversation, Teresa and Vikram. It's really helpful to get different perspectives and to at least raise these questions.
Yeah, the idea is to just have those conversations. You're not really getting to some, you don't want to conclude on a certain level. It's just thoughts coming out, and then however people take it forward. Before this, obviously, there's a lot to talk about, definitely, about the in mediation and success in mediation and a successful mediation. I was trying to, of course, bring out something there, but I mean, those are, I think, maybe just dissecting it a little too much. Then otherwise, was there healing happening? That's another way people gauge it. So there are lots, I think, lots of factors which finally go to it. But main important thing is, at the end of the day, are they going to tell other people that they had a good experience? I think that for me is that is where success lies for the development and promotion of mediators and mediation. For me, that is also important. The mediator is also an important link in it. So how you connected with that person is also, I think, that is also an important part. So thank you very much. As always, pleasure speaking to both of you. And please drop in tomorrow. There's some interesting sessions happening. Interesting sessions happening every day. It's not that tomorrow, every day. But please, mediation and personal transformation. Mediation models, expanding the framework. Then we have non-violent communication mediation. So interesting, all interesting. Yep.
Very good.
So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you.